another lesson in Hebrews, in the book of Hebrews, and so we're going to have fun with it. We're going to start off with Hebrews chapter 5, verses 7 and 8. And it says, during his earthly life, he offered prayers and appeals with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverence. Though his son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. Okay, though his son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. What an amazing um, scripture or passage or verse there. We need to look at actually the road to obedience, if you will. The path that he took in life is the path that we will travel. And you know what? The scripture says that. It says during his earthly life, this is the King James, in the days of his flesh. And it's a reference to a time when he walked this earth as a man. And the Greek is flesh and soft substance of living body, which covers the bones and is permeated with blood of both man and beast, or the body, if you will. And that's what we're talking about here as we go into this. But this is important for two reasons. First, it shows he had flesh, just as which is important because some would say it only seemed that way. Okay, and they're denying. Remember, one of the tests is that he came in the flesh. Okay, and this would go back to John chapter 1, verses 1 through 14. It's because it's important for us to know that he became flesh, for us to know that we're to follow his path. We also come to a place where we truly recognize him as having come in the flesh, and all that he went through was in the flesh. First John chapter 4, verse 2, he came in the flesh. He's only as we recognize this point will we be able to see him as going through all we do. Okay, and that's important because that's also one of the points of what the Hebrews is trying to bring out. And we're going to get into that as we continue into Hebrews. And only as we recognize his walk will we be able to see how he could know intimately where we are and what we go through as he identifies with him, if we identify with him. He offered prayers. The root word means to carry, but also means to bear patiently. Okay, and to think about that for a minute, the things that he went through, he bore patiently. Okay, and if you look at Joseph when he was in prison, there was a guy that was patient as well, and he actually is a shadow picture of Yeshua, of Jesus. And remember, he was appointed before the foundation of the earth to be the Son, the Messiah. Uh, but there were things to go along with that office or appointed. And if we are to understand, what was decreed before the foundation of the world, we must also understand the decree included the life that he would live here on earth. So if you look at First Peter chapter 1, verses 18 through 20, this was decreed before the foundation of the earth for us to believe in him or put our faith in him. So his suffering and death were part of that decree. Of what he was suffering are inscribed in a decree then. Okay, it was back then. It was already decided. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. The Hebrew word for place or put means rest or safety, and this is a safety Yahweh God gives us to his people in the land. Okay, and it's kind of interesting here. Uh, we can see this if we look at Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 10. The word rest is the same Hebrew word for put, Okay, so in the garden or the land, man had rest, or he rest in safety from their enemies. Now, if you look at Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, man has sinned, but the word put comes up again, but in this case, it is a different word meaning to place, or there's a hostility between man and the serpent, and between her seed. But the woman's seed will crush the head of the serpent, and the serpent will bruise the heel of the woman's seed. Okay, so it's starting to play out. It's starting to show as we look at Scripture just what was going to happen. Through this sin, man was removed from land, which also removed him from Yahweh, God's rest. So being removed from the land also removes us from his safety and his rest. As you look at Genesis chapter 3, verse 21, Yahweh, God, killed an animal and made a covering for them. And the word clothed means wrap around. But if you look at Hebrews 9:22, without the shedding of blood, remember the remission of sins means freedom or pardon, and also associated with the divorce of a household or a spouse. The skin is also linked to Sukkot. Okay, if you look at Leviticus chapter 23, verse 42, booths, Sukkot is also known as the festival of booths, and the root word is sakat, which means to protect or to cover, and is linked to the skins of the tabernacle. Okay, so it kind of ties into all of that. Okay, and if you look at Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 through 5, the word tabernacle means booth. Look at the cloud overshadow. It means envelop, to cover, or to wrap around. So he was here to carry out this decree, and in that he offered up prayers and appeals, and this is intense prayers or petitions, appeals, or in the King James, supplication means to seek the Father's favor. Okay, in these things, and so he was intense in his prayers, and as you look at this, I think that what he was facing was probably the most intense thing that anybody could face. And so, but he, at the other hand, didn't try to flee it. He didn't try to escape it. He simply went before the Father, and he prayed in intense prayers. And this is important because the word tears means loud cry out. This was intense praying, and if you look at Luke chapter 22, 39 through 46, tears, okay, he prayed to the one who could save him from death. The word "from" can also mean by means of or through death, if you will. And if you look at 2 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 4, to be raised up with him, and 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 8, to be absent of the body. Okay, and what Paul's talking about, that be absent of the body, be present with the Lord. And so those are things that actually comes out in this. Okay, so Yeshua was heard because of his reverence. The word reverence means circumspection, which means he careful to consider all circumstances and possible consequences, if you will. And if you look at verse 8, even though he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. Okay, if you look at Philippians chapter 2, verse 8, he was obedient to the Father through his word, even unto death. Okay, and that's also a picture of humility as well, that he humbled himself through this obedience. Now, this ought to tell us really something about this whole thing. It is through the suffering that we go through that we learn to be obedient. As we surrender to him through his word. Look at John chapter 16 verse 33. He has overcome the world. Now think about this. In that prayer in the garden, he asked, okay? He asked for the cup to pass from him, but also said, not my will, but yours, Father, be done. Okay? So there's the aspect of this humility, the surrender and everything is I would like to not do this, but I want your will. It's your will that I want done here. And at that point, every point in his life, he was circumspect or considered the consequences and chose the Father's will to be obedient. And he chose to stay under the Father's covering. This tells us that it's not the temptation that is sin. It's the failure to consider the consequences and choose the Father's will that is the sin. Now, think about this. Whatever he was whatever he was presented with the consequences of his actions before taking them. Okay? This also implies that he knew the Torah well enough to be able to evaluate the consequences of his decision. Now, of course, he's the Word, and so one would expect him to know that. I guess what I'm considering here, and what I'm trying to say, is that we don't often stop and think of the consequences of the actions I'm considering taking. Okay, if we did, we may not take some of those actions because we would be able to weigh them between the consequences of those actions and the will of the Father. And that's exactly what he did here, is that he stopped, he considered those things, he thought about those things, he thought about the consequences of the actions that he would take, but he also considered that with the Father's will. And the Father's will always came on top of everything of his decision making. Okay, so he was after the Father's will, and that made him humble, if you will. That made him humble. Okay, I just like you to subscribe to this channel. I would like you to give us a thumbs up on the video. Also, leave us some messages. Give us your comments and so forth about what you hear here. And also, if you have any questions, don't stop. Just continue to ask those questions. We would love to get back to you and talk those over with you. You have a great day.